We've got some breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. Titans running back Derrick Henry going to have an MRI today to determine the severity of an injury suffered during Sunday's win over the Colts. CBS Sports NFL insider Jason La Canfora confirming it's thought to be a serious foot injury, but that timetable for how long he'll be out or when he can return is up to the results of those medical tests. Tennessee at 6-2, first place in the AFC South, and as of right now, number one seed in the AFC. Remember, with that new playoff format, just one bye in the postseason in each conference. Here's a look at his numbers against the Colts, 68 rushing yards. He's also the league's reigning rushing champion, went for more than 2,000 yards last year, leading all rushers in yards this year with 937. The next closest running back is Nick Chubb at 584. King Henry coming in as the number one overall fantasy player in two of our three senior fantasy analysts on CBS Sports. All right, with more on this, we got senior NFL reporter and analyst Jonathan Jones joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. JJ, what more can you tell us? And not only, of course, what's happening with Derrick Henry, but how this might impact this Tennessee team.
Yeah, it's huge for Tennessee. I mean, if you talk about MVP in the NFL, obviously the NFL MVP award is reserved nowadays for quarterbacks, but you'd be hard-pressed to think of another player who has more value on the football field to his team than Derrick Henry does with the Tennessee Titans. And the NFL Offensive Player of the Year, the rushing leader in both yards and touchdowns the past 2 years. I mean, the guy is just an absolute tank for this team. And every week he's asked about how he takes care of his body and making sure that he can go for those 3 hours on Sunday. And injuries are bound to happen, of course, and this foot injury is a difficult one for any running back. He has played through any number of injuries and hamstrings and quads over the years, but the foot, especially if there is a broken bone in the foot, is extremely difficult to manage without surgery and play through. It's hard to imagine that if surgery does happen, certainly it would happen as quickly as possible, but if surgery does happen, that he's going to be on the shelf for any number of weeks, potentially for the rest of the season. But this, again, when you talk about value to a team, what an offense does in this National Football League, Derrick Henry and what he does for the Tennessee Titans, his yards per carry, his usage, the play action, which is not as much as the Titans have used in years previous, back when Arthur Smith was offensive coordinator. These things matter more to any other team, or matter more to the Tennessee Titans rather than any other team in the league.
We saw his splits there from the first 6 games of the season to the last 2, where he's not found pay dirt in game 7 or 8, I should say, week 7 and 8. There's Jeremy McNichols behind him, and then there's not a lot after that with the practice squad. What do you anticipate if it is indeed a longer-term injury, potentially season-ending injury there, JJ, about what they'll be able to do in that running back group?
Well, fortunately for the Tennessee Titans, if this injury had to happen, at least it happened right before the trade deadline at 4 p.m. Eastern on tomorrow. And so they have, more than 24 hours now to go out and try to find a trade partner to bring on an available running back. And everyone knows that Marlon Mack has been available from the from the Indianapolis Colts. Them being the AFC South makes it extremely unlikely that the Colts would trade Marlon Mack to the Tennessee Titans. And if they did, that the draft compensation would be much higher than Marlon Mack really should bring in. So that doesn't seem like an option at all. Denver just winning on yesterday against the Washington football team probably means that they are still in the hunt and would not be interested in parting ways with a Melvin Gordon and make it the Javonte Williams show, the rookie that they drafted back in the spring. So you look elsewhere. I'm certain that they'd like to call the Ravens in any one of their running backs that they may or may not be using as other guys get healthy and as they figure out who they are after their rash of running back injuries earlier in the season. Perhaps when you think about a big bruising running back, Mike Davis, perhaps. But you're looking at an exact replacement for Derrick Henry, and there isn't one, not only in the NFL, but maybe on earth. So that sort of mix of size, speed, power that combination. He was just coming into his own as a receiver here in his 6th year. You're not going to go out and trade. You could give somebody a first-round pick. You're not going to find somebody who's going to be a one-to-one to Derrick Henry. That's not going to happen. So you just have to find someone here in the next 30 or so hours that you can bring into Tennessee, give up some decent draft compensation, because frankly, they know that you're going to be desperate. They know that you're in the playoff hunt there in the AFC, and you don't want to have anything derail that. And very clearly, an injury to your most valuable player would derail that. So you're going to try to fix that as quickly as possible. So they can be held hostage a little bit by another team wanting more in trade compensation. And frankly, the Tennessee Titans are just going to have to pay it in order to keep this season afloat.
It's interesting. You bring up the trade deadline. It's intriguing. A lot of ifs, of course. If Derrick Henry is going to be out for the rest of the season, if they can get some help, if that ends up being the case, how does this change right now under this prism right now, JJ? How does this change your view of Tennessee as they're trying to stay among the AFC elite?
Well, I think that they can still win the AFC South without Derrick Henry and with a replacement, just because of the gap that they have already created there in the AFC South. We see it there. A 3-game lead over the only team that could catch them, and they own right now the tiebreaker by virtue of their overtime win on Sunday. So it's going to take a lot for the Indianapolis Colts themselves, with any number of issues, to overtake Tennessee. So I still have Tennessee as a playoff team. They're still going to be playing in January. But if you had this team in the AFC title game like they were a couple of years ago, and really taking, the Bills or Baltimore down to the wire, I don't know if they can do that in mid to late January without Derrick Henry. So again, they're in one of the worst divisions in football, perennially one of the worst divisions in football. They have done quite well in that division, and I think that because of the lead that they have created here halfway through the season, that it would take a whole lot for them to sort of sputter that away and for the Colts to overtake them. The Colts have a couple of tough games coming up as well. The Bills in Week 11, I can remember. And so I can see the Tennessee Titans certainly making the playoffs without Derrick Henry, but beyond that, without the best pure running back in the NFL, I don't see how they can actually make noise in January.
JJ, certainly appreciate it. Jonathan Jones with the insight there on the very latest on the breaking news. Again, Derrick Henry will undergo an MRI. Look for further tests to determine the severity of his foot injury in their win over the Colts on Sunday. Here is the Sportsline impact. Titans with and without Derrick Henry projected to be 11.5 wins, and without him, that drops by nearly a full game. Interesting to note in terms of Vegas odds makers at Caesars Sportsbook, they had already taken the Titans off the division board, plus 650 to win the AFC, 14-1 to win the Super Bowl. It'll be interesting to see with the news if they take it off the board and then have to readjust. Just to give you some context, Chiefs are also 14-1, Ravens at 11-1, as well as the Arizona Cardinals in the futures market. We're going to take a break, 60 seconds. When we come back, the fantasy impact, it will be big. Guys, you need to target Jeremy McNichols among them, with Dave, Richard, and Jamey Eisenberg, with Brandon Baylor on the other side.
We got breaking news on the NFL in Tennessee when it concerns with Derrick Henry has a potentially season-ending foot injury. That coming in the win yesterday against Indy. Had some time in this one where he had 28 carries and 68 yards in that one. You can see right there, walking it off. But when you talk about Derrick Henry, of course, and the load he's carried this year, of the 230 carries from the backfield, he's responsible for 219. By the way, leads the league with 937 yards, set for MRI later today to find out if this is a long-term deal for the Rush King. As you can see there, the breakdown for the first 6 weeks, over $130 there, but the last 2 weeks, 7 and 8, a little under what he's used to do. As you can see there, no rushing touchdowns in weeks 7 and 8 for Derrick Henry. All right, let's get that fantasy angle here. Our Jamey Eisenberg joining us from home, and also Dave Richard here in studio. Dave, I'll start with you. The reaction to this news here, the Rush King likely out for some time. We don't know the extent, though.
I can't say what I said when I heard the news because I'll get kicked out of here. No, I can't. There are a lot of bad words that were spoken, but it's really a nightmare situation for fantasy managers. We're taking the best player in fantasy football and taking him out of the game. And that's what's happening to the Titans. They're going to need to replace him. There's no replacing Derrick Henry. They're probably going to mix and match multiple running backs to do so. Jeremy Nichols would be the first guy up for them. We've seen him used in passing situations. He's actually sported, this is funny, a better yards per carry number and a better yards after contact per carry than Derrick Henry. But that doesn't mean he's better. He's not. And he's going to end up splitting work with somebody else there, whether it's somebody that they trade for at the deadline or somebody else, Dontrell Hilliard maybe. It's a nightmare. Fantasy managers shouldn't want to go after Jerry McNichols as the option. The time is now to make a trade for a running back that's like 40% of Derrick Henry. It's totally ugly, and it's going to ruin a lot of fantasy teams.
Yeah, the nice thing is that we're going to see if they get aggressive at the trade deadline. You know, with the fact that that's tomorrow, you know, we'll see what the Titans are going to try and do. You know, is they going to get somebody off somebody's depth chart? You know, for me, I'd be looking at a guy like maybe like a Benny Snell. You know, you see Tevin Coleman's name floated out there, maybe one of the San Francisco backups. Ronald Jones, if they can maybe pry him off the Bucs backfield, off their depth chart. Maybe Tyson Williams, if the Ravens really don't like him, go get him, see what they can, you know, make that happen. But if it is Jerry McNichols and we get through the trade deadline, you're going to see a lot of fab spent on him because if he's going to have that opportunity, he is the next man up. We'll see if Dontrell Hilliard gets a chance to maybe get some work. They're going to bring in somebody. I hope it's not somebody old and decrepit like Adrian Peterson. I'd rather see one of the young guys get a shot. So McNichols is going to be the most popular player off waivers as of now. But if we get to the trade deadline and somebody else is added, that player is going to be the most added player in fantasy for week number 9.
Yeah, McNichols, of course, not much of a carry this year, just 7 for 38. You see the rush yards per attempt just under 5, fantasy points just 6.4. So maybe a little uptick depending on what they do for the trade deadline there. Dave?
I mean, I'm just saying I don't think he can keep up this yards per game receiving at 25.4. Otherwise, he'd be a pretty amazing player for fantasy. But that is where he's made a decent impact for Tennessee. He had been working as a passing downs guy, and that's what they've done to try and take Derrick Henry off the field a little bit. I imagine that they'll keep McNichols in that role at a bare minimum.
You mentioned the passing there. Are we looking at Ryan Tannehill now as, you know, this is the franchise quarterback in Tennessee? Can he throw the ball 40 or 50 times? If you have him as your starting quarterback, are you happy with him for the next couple of weeks?
I think you absolutely have to consider him now as a possible guy that this offense is the Tennessee offense is going to run through. It makes perfect sense. Can he be great for fantasy week in and week out? I don't think anybody's going to feel good starting Ryan Tannehill, especially since it's just A.J. Brown and then maybe, you know, the corpse of Julio Jones that's playing alongside him. They don't really have another option in the passing game to go with them. He would be, at best, a high-end streamer for me moving forward, even without Derrick Henry. Part of the allure for him is that play-action passing that he does, because Henry is such a threat. Defense is key in on Henry. If Henry's not there, it makes it a lot easier to play against the pass in Tennessee.
Yeah, I think for Tannehill, you know, maybe he uses his legs a little bit more now. You know, we haven't really seen that from him to the extent that he typically does. But he's in trouble. I mean, this is an offensive line that struggled. This is a receiving core that's down to one guy. And so, you know, I think Dave said it best. He's a high-end number 2 guy at best. You know, the volume will certainly be up, and we'll have to see what they do. You know, this is just an incomplete right now. You know, so if they add somebody that's going to help them, then certainly Tannehill will still have some opportunities. His volume's going to have to go up because they're not going to be able to rely on whoever the running back is to the same extent. And A.J. Brown is going to be fed targets. So hopefully Julio Jones comes back and they turn into a little bit more of a passing team. It's on Todd Downing now, the new offensive coordinator. You know, how is he going to adjust to this? Because you know what their offense has been. It didn't change much going from Arthur Smith to Todd Downing. Now it's up to Downing to sort of change the approach of what this team is, the outlook of what this team is. They're still very much in the driver's seat of a bad division in the AFC South. Imagine if the Colts had won that game yesterday. They would be feeling pretty good about themselves right now, looking at a head-to-head win, 2 head-to-head wins against that team, or excuse me, head-to-head win against that team, splitting 1-1, and then coming out of this without Derrick Henry. Colts are in bad shape still, but the Titans are in bad shape as well now that they don't have Derrick Henry on their roster.
Jamie, of course, a good thing here is the trade deadline, of course, is tomorrow at 4 p.m., so that's maybe the silver lining. They have a chance to add a piece there, maybe a Marlon Mack. I highly doubt Tony Pollard is leaving Dallas there.
No chance.
But any options out there for them to add somebody that can do maybe 50 to 40%, like Dave said, what Henry has done?
Yeah, it's not going to be Tony Pollard. It's definitely not going to be Marlon Mack. The Colts are not trading within their division. You're looking at a team that's got probably a third or fourth running back. To me, I'd go look at Benny Snell. I know he's not great, but he's the type of physical running back that could fit this offense. Steelers are definitely not using him anytime soon. So that's be the first place I'd go look because you could probably get him cheap. The guys that have been mentioned, the Texans guys. I don't know if David Johnson or Philip Lindsay comes in and makes a difference to the same extent, obviously, of what Derrick Henry is. But that's probably a team that they'll call and see if they're willing to, part with one of the two guys after getting rid of Mark Ingram. I think you could look at the Ravens if they're going to move on from Tyson Williams. Who knows if the Titans offer the right compensation, maybe Tyson Williams can end up finding his way to Tennessee. Ronald Jones, I doubt, but you heard some trade rumors potentially if the Bucs wanted to move on from him. So they're going to make some calls, but my guess is they'll bring in a street free agent and see what they can find. As our buddy Pete Prisco will say, running backs grow on trees. We're going to find out that really soon if the Titans can really make that happen.
And now here's the bad news. If all those names that Jamey mentioned as possible replacements for Derrick Henry make you sick as a fantasy manager, here's the list of running backs that you might be able to trade for at a discounted price to replace Derrick Henry. And we're talking about maybe giving up a pretty decent wide receiver to go get a James Conner, Melvin Gordon, J.D. McKissick in PPR leagues. Antonio Gibson's value right now is in the tank, so maybe you can get him at a discount. Myles Gaskin. I mean, these are not names, when you compare them to Derrick Henry, Brandon, you look at him and you laugh at him. But you can't anymore because they're going to get you more fantasy points than Derrick Henry in the next couple of weeks at the very minimum.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to kind of replace the 937 that he has already on the season. 353 more than the next guy. And we're talking about the Rush King there. As always, we'll see how that pans out. Jamey Eisenberg and Dave Richard, appreciate your time. Catch him on FFT. The guy is always breaking it down with this breaking news here with Derrick Henry there as well. Let's take a look at the Titans schedule. Of course, we don't know the timetable or time frame yet. The MRI set for today for Derrick Henry, but boy, you look at it there. You get the Rams, of course, that's Sunday night. Then you get the Saints, Texans, Patriots, a bye week. Also, we have to see what happens before tomorrow at 4 p.m., the trade deadline. What happens for the Titans here. Keep it here at CBS Sports HQ with all the breaking news, of course, on this, the latest with Henry.